kind that bounces off marble walls and crawls inside your ears and stays there. Vespera's head snapped sideways. Her glasses, thick, ugly, the kind that screamed, "I am nobody," spun across the floor like a dying coin. The room froze. 20 guests in $20,000 outfits stood with their champagne glasses midair, not breathing, not blinking. The white silk rug beneath Vespera's knees, the one worth more than most people's cars, was now bleeding red, a full bottle of 1945 wine soaking into every fiber. Isadora Thorne stood over her, diamonds on her neck, ice in her eyes, peppermint on her breath. "You stuttering, pathetic little mouse," Isidora said. Not loud. Loud would have been better. She said it soft. Nana, the way people talk when they've done this before and stopped caring who watched. "That bottle was older than your bloodline." Vespera stayed on her knees, head down, hair falling over her face, shoulders trembling just enough for the room to feel sorry for her. Just enough. Because here is what the room did not know. In the 3 seconds after the slap, Vespera had already counted 4 exits, 2 blind spots in the security cameras, and the exact amount of pressure needed to collapse Isadora's windpipe with a single thumb. She hadn't moved, not because she was afraid, because the mission wasn't finished yet. 48 hours earlier, Vespera was sitting under a single bulb in a room that didn't exist, stitching a 3-inch cut in her own thigh with no anesthesia and a hand that didn't shake once. She wasn't a nanny then. She was a ghost, the kind governments deny, the kind that shows up in a city and leaves it quieter. Her handler called her the best Tier 0 operative the syndicate had ever built. Her enemies called her nothing, because the ones who found out what she was didn't get to call her anything after. But 2 days later, she was on her knees on a silk rug, trembling, stuttering, small, by choice. The man who hired her had said it plainly. "I don't want a bodyguard, I want a shadow. If they see your blade, you've failed." His name was Corvus Thorne. Crime, money, power. A man who moved billions through the dark and never got a wrinkle in his suit. He had 2 children, twins, 6 years old. Eyes like animals kept in a cage too long. He said the world wanted them dead. He said he needed someone to keep them breathing. He said a lot of things. What he did not say, what Vespera would only discover when the blood was already on the floor, was the part that changed everything. Before Vespera was a nanny, she was an answer to a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What do you send when sending anyone else means failure? The syndicate had a word for what she was. Tier 0. It wasn't a rank, it was a category. The kind of category that only has one person in it at a time, because the last one usually ends up in an unmarked location that satellites can't find. Vespera had held the title for 6 years. She was still alive. That alone should tell you something. The room where they trained her didn't have windows, not because of secrecy, because windows mean weather. And weather means distraction, and distraction, in Vespera's world, means a body bag with your name stitched on the inside. She learned to fight in the dark, not metaphorically, literally. Lights off, 3 opponents, no rules except one. Don't stop moving until the room goes quiet. She learned languages the way other people learn to breathe, without thinking, without trying, just absorbed and stored and deployed when needed. She learned to cook, to sew, to play the piano at a concert level, not for culture, for cover. Every skill was a costume. Every costume was a door into a world that would otherwise never let her in. A Tier 0 operative doesn't kick down doors. She's already inside before you thought to lock them. By the time she was 26, she had 17 documented identities. Each one had a backstory, one a hometown, a nervous habit, a favorite food. The details mattered because details are what people remember. Nobody remembers the broad strokes of a stranger. They remember that she bit her nails. They remember that she flinched at loud noises. They remember that she was harmless. That was always the goal. Harmless. The nanny identity was one she'd used twice before. Both times it had worked perfectly. The disguise wasn't complicated. Mousy brown hair, thick glasses, a slight drag in her left foot that made her look like someone the world had already kicked around enough. She practiced the stutter for 4 hours straight. Not just the sound of it, but the shame of it. The way a person's shoulders cave when they can't get a word out and a room full of people is watching. She wore that shame like armor. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It's the most dangerous weapon in existence. When Corvus Thorne's assistant sent her the mission brief, Vespera read it once and closed the file. She didn't need to read it twice. The threat was external. The Volkov Syndicate, Eastern European, brutal. The kind of organization that doesn't send warnings because they consider warnings a form of mercy, and they don't believe in mercy. They wanted the twins dead. Corvus wanted them protected. Simple. Or so she thought. She packed one bag. Inside it, 3 items that looked useless and weren't, and 1 item that looked dangerous and was. She zipped it shut. She walked toward the lion's den in sensible flat shoes, and she smiled. Corvus Thorne didn't look like a monster. That was the problem. He looked like the kind of man you'd trust with your life-saving, and your daughter's hand, and your country's nuclear codes. Tall, measured. A voice like someone who'd never once said a sentence he hadn't already edited in his head. His suit had no wrinkles. Vespera noticed that first. Not the bodyguards flanking him. Not the panic room built into the wall behind his desk. Not the way his eyes moved across every person who entered, like a scanner running a threat assessment. The suit. Because a suit with no wrinkles means one of 2 things. Either this man never sits, or he's so controlled, so deliberate in every movement that even gravity respects him. Both options were worth fearing. My children are 6 years old, Corvus said. He didn't say good morning. He didn't offer her a seat. He just started talking. Oh, the way powerful men do when they've decided the preamble is beneath them. Soren and Alara, they are my only legacy in this world. Everything I've built, every deal, every war, every sacrifice, exists so that they can inherit something worth inheriting. He slid a photograph across the desk. Vespera looked at it. 2 children, pale, thin, sitting side by side on a gold-framed sofa that was bigger than most bedrooms. They weren't holding hands. They weren't smiling. They were just existing in a space that clearly wasn't built for children. Their eyes were the detail that stayed with her, wide, quiet, the eyes of people who had learned very early that the world did not ask for their opinion. Don't get attached, she told herself. It was already too late. The Volkov Syndicate has made 3 attempts in the last 8 months, Corvus continued. 2 were intercepted. 1 wasn't. He paused. My son has a scar above his left ear from the one that wasn't. Vespera said nothing. I don't want security, Corvus said. Security is visible. Visible is a target. I want someone the threat doesn't see coming. Someone the household doesn't question. Someone who can be inside the walls without the walls knowing what she is. A nanny, Vesper said. A shadow, Corvus corrected. She looked at him for a long moment. The lighting in the room was deliberately warm, the kind of lighting designers use to make people feel safe. She filed that detail away. My terms, she said, full access, no restricted zones, no interference from your security team. And if I say move, everyone moves, including you. Corvus smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already decided she would say yes, and was simply waiting for her to arrive at the conclusion he'd prepared for her. Agreed, he said. They shook hands. Vespera left the building, walked 2 blocks, and stood still for a moment on the pavement. Something about the meeting was bothering her. She couldn't name it yet, but in her line of work, the things you can't name yet are exactly the things that will kill you. Transformation isn't a disguise. A disguise is a costume. A costume is something you put on, and anything you put on can be seen through by anyone paying close enough attention. Transformation is different. Transformation goes into the body. Vespera spent 12 hours becoming someone else. She started with the hair, mousy brown. The kind of brown that doesn't catch light. The kind of brown that makes people look past you the way they look past walls. Then the glasses, thick frames, lenses that blurred her pupils from sharp and predatory to soft and unfocused. She'd had the lenses custom made for this exact purpose. They didn't distort her vision, just her appearance. Then the walk. The walk was the hardest part. Vespera's natural gait was the kind that parted crowds. Weight forward, arms controlled, the unconscious signal of someone who had decided where she was going and had already calculated how long it would take. Predator's walk, military walk, the walk of a woman who had never once stumbled in her life. She couldn't walk like that. So she practiced for 4 hours, tilting her pelvis, softening her knees, letting her right shoulder drift forward like someone who spent years hunched over a desk apologizing for her height. She practiced the way her foot would catch on nothing, just a fraction of a second of false hesitation that made her look clumsy without making her look fake. The stutter took another 2 hours. Not just the sound. She had the sound in 10 minutes. The hard B's, the trapped T's, the breath that got swallowed before the word could escape. What took time was the shame. She had to wear the shame of it, had to let it live in her face. The slight heat in the cheeks, the eyes that went down instead of up. The way a stutterer braces before speaking, like they're already apologizing for the inconvenience of needing to say something. She stood in front of the mirror and practiced being pitied. And she was brilliant at it. The last thing she packed was a small flat device the size of a credit card. It could loop any security feed on a standard network in under 8 seconds. She hid it in the lining of her sensible flat shoe. She left her real phone in the safe house. She left her real name at the door. She picked up the cheap polyester suitcase, the kind that screams this person has no money and very little hope, and walked out into the city as Vespera the Nanny, nervous, forgettable, harmless, and more dangerous than anyone in the Obsidian Spire could possibly imagine. The Obsidian Spire didn't look like a home. It looked like a warning. Glass and steel rising out of the city's highest peak like something that had grown there instead of being built. The windows didn't reflect the sky. They absorbed it. Dark, tinted, impenetrable. Even the air around the building felt different. Quieter, tighter, 30 armed guards, thermal sensors, biometric locks on every internal door. A security nerve center on the 14th floor that monitored every square inch of the property in real time. Vespera had read the full security brief on the train ride over. She counted 11 vulnerabilities before she reached the service entrance. The head of security was a man named Silas. He had the neck of a bull and the eyes of someone who had spent so long being the most dangerous person in every room that he'd stopped checking. That was vulnerability number 1. He looked at Vespera's suitcase, cheap, scratched, one of the wheels dragging, and his face did something between a smirk and a yawn. "You're the new nanny," he said. Not a question, a verdict. Yes, sir," Vespera said. Her eyes went to the floor immediately. Her fingers found the handle of the suitcase and held it like it was the only stable thing in her world. Silas looked at her the way people look at furniture. "You'll stay in the East Wing. You don't go to the 14th floor. You don't talk to the security team unless spoken to. You feed the kids, you watch the kids, you stay out of the way." He leaned in slightly. "We've had 3 nannies in 4 months. The last one left crying. You look like you're already halfway there." His team laughed. Vespera looked up just long enough to seem wounded. Then she looked back down. 12 vulnerabilities, she thought. "Yeah, you just became number 12. The interior of the spire was the kind of beautiful that felt like punishment. Marble floors so polished you could see your own face in them. Ceilings so high the air near the top was a different temperature. Art on the walls that had probably seen more human warmth in museum storage than it ever would here. A maid showed her to a room at the end of the east corridor. Small, plain. The only room in the building that hadn't been designed to impress anyone, which meant it was the only room in the building that felt almost honest. Vespera set her suitcase on the bed and stood still for a moment. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. Felt the building's vibrations, the low hum of the ventilation system, the distant murmur of the security floor above. She closed her eyes. "I'm in," she thought. "Now the real work begins." The nursery didn't look like a nursery. It looked like someone had read a description of what a nursery should contain and bought the most expensive version of every item on the list without once asking what a child might actually want. Gold-framed shelves, toys still in their packaging. A rocking horse made of carved mahogany that was clearly never meant to be ridden. Books arranged by spine color, not by story. And in the middle of all of it, 2 children who looked like they had been placed there by the same decorator. Soren sat on the floor with his knees pulled up to his chest, staring at a specific patch of carpet like it owed him something. He was thin, sharp-featured. The kind of 6-year-old whose face already knew how to go completely blank. And Isadora sat on the edge of the bed, holding a small threadbare bear with one ear missing. It was the only thing in the room that looked touched, loved, real. They both looked up when Vespera entered. Neither of them smiled. "Are you the new one?" Soren asked, still looking at the carpet. Yes, Vesper said. She set her suitcase on the floor, let it fall open. Cheap socks tumbling out in every direction, a disaster so small and so stupid that it could only belong to someone genuinely incompetent. Isadora made a sound, not a laugh, the beginning of one, quickly swallowed. Like she'd been taught that laughing at someone was wrong, but her body hadn't fully received the memo yet. Vespera looked up at her through the thick glasses with a perfectly mortified expression. Isadora covered her mouth, the beginning of a smile. "When there it is," Vespera thought. "That's the door." "The last one cried," Soren said. "All of them cried," Isadora added quietly, in the tone of someone reporting a weather pattern. Don't cry much," Vespera said, gathering her socks with exaggerated clumsiness, dropping 2 for every one she picked up. Isadora slid off the bed and crouched down and started picking up socks without being asked. Soren still hadn't moved, but he was watching now. Not the socks, her. The way children watch when something doesn't quite add up yet, and their brain hasn't decided whether that's interesting or dangerous. "Smart kid," Vespera noted. "Dangerous kind of smart." She spent the rest of the afternoon being wonderfully useless. She misread a picture book. She poured too much juice. She asked Soren to explain a simple card game twice, as if she couldn't grasp the rules and watch the way explaining things made his shoulders drop just slightly. And when Isadora fell asleep holding her one-eared bear, Vespera sat on the floor with her back against the bed and her eyes on the door. Still, silent, watching, like a dragon at the mouth of a cave. Lady Isadora Thorne didn't walk into rooms. She arrived in them. There was a difference. Walking was neutral. Arriving was a statement. It said, "I was absent before. Now I am here. Adjust accordingly." She was Corvus's sister-in-law, widow of his younger brother, a man who had died 3 years ago in a way nobody in the house ever discussed above a whisper. She had no official role in the Spire, but she behaved like she owned the foundation it stood on. The first time she looked at Vespera, where she didn't look at her face, she looked at her shoes. Scuffed, sensible, flat. The shoes of someone who buys footwear for function and has never once considered whether it matches anything. Something passed across Isadora's face. Not contempt exactly. More like satisfaction. The private, quiet satisfaction of a predator confirming that the thing in front of her poses no threat. "You," Isidora said. Vespera looked up with wide eyes. "Mummy?" "You are here to be invisible," Isidora said. She moved through the room without touching anything, the way people move when they want you to know they could break everything in it if they chose to. You feed the children. You bathe the children. You read to them if they insist on it. You do not speak at meals. You do not have opinions. You do not exist except when you are needed. She stopped in front of Vespera, close enough that Vespera could smell the peppermint. "If I hear your voice without first hearing my name, Silas will find a use for you that is considerably less comfortable than childcare." She tilted her head. "Do we understand each other, little mouse?" Vespera bobbed her head immediately, eyes down, hands clasped. Yes, ma'am." Isidora held the moment a beat longer than necessary, the way people do when they want the power of it to soak all the way through you. Then she turned and walked out. The door closed. Vespera stood in the silence. In her mind, she ran a quick inventory. Isidora was 5'8", thin but not weak. The kind of woman who played tennis twice a week and would tell you about it unprompted. When her left wrist carried a tension she'd likely had for years. A slight rotation when she moved. Probably an old injury, badly rehabilitated. She wore rings on 3 fingers of her right hand. Heavy rings. She hit with that hand. Vespera knew this because she'd watched the hand. She always watched the hand. She's not the threat, Vespera decided. She's the noise. In every operation, there was a real threat and there was noise. Noise was people who used cruelty to feel safe. They were dangerous the way bad weather was dangerous, unpleasant, capable of damage, but ultimately just a condition to work around. The real threat was elsewhere. Vespera just hadn't found it yet. She straightened her glasses. She went back to work. Vespera didn't sleep the first 3 nights. Not because she was afraid, because listening was more valuable than rest. She sat on the floor of her small room with her back against the cold wall and her eyes open in the dark, running a map of the spire inside her head, updating it, every creak of the building at 2 a.m., every shift in the ventilation pattern, every set of footsteps that moved differently at night than during the day. A house tells you its secrets if you're quiet enough to hear them, and this house had many. Within 24 hours, she'd found 12 dead zones in the security network. The thermal sensors on the west corridor had a 6-second delay when triggered by the heating system cycling. The camera in the kitchen had a 17-degree blind spot in its lower left corner. Enough room for a person to stand if they stood correctly. The biometric lock on the 14th floor had a manual override panel hidden behind the fire extinguisher casing. The override required a code, but the keypad had 3 keys with more wear than the others. She filed all of it away. Then she started building. She planted her own sensors over 3 days. Microscopic. Hair-thin fiber threads stretched across door frames at ankle height. Invisible unless you knew to look. And nobody in the spire was looking for things planted by the nanny. Each thread connected to a small receiver the size of a button, tucked inside the lining of the stuffed bear in the nursery. She now knew the moment any door in the building opened. She could feel the spire breathing. The bugs were harder. She planted the first one under the dining table during a clumsy incident with a lemonade tray that sent liquid across 4 guests and gave her 45 seconds of crouching and apologizing with perfect cover to press the device against the underside of the mahogany with her thumbnail. The second one went behind the kitchen ventilation grate during a fumble with the window curtains. The third, the most important one, went inside the lamp in Isadora's private sitting room. That one required real nerve. She pulled it off while pretending to retrieve Alara's ball. At night, listening through an earpiece no larger than a grain of rice, Vespera began to understand the texture of the household's fear. Silas's team talk the way men talk when they're trying to convince themselves they're not nervous. Loud, competitive, accrued. The house staff moved like people who had been corrected one too many times and were now afraid of being noticed. And the children. At night, they barely made a sound, not because they were peaceful. Vespera had been around enough frightened people to know the difference between the quiet of safety and the quiet of holding yourself still because you'd learned that stillness was the safest thing to be. These children were holding still. Not for much longer, Vespera thought. I'm here now. By the end of the first week, Vespera had become the house's favorite joke. This was intentional. A laughingstock is invisible. A laughingstock can go anywhere, touch anything, linger in any room, and the most the staff will do is roll their eyes and shake their heads and move on. And nobody watches the person they've already dismissed. She leaned into it. The lemonade incident became legend by the second day. 4 guests, 1 tray, a river of ice-cold lemonade across the mahogany dining table, and into the lap of Isadora's most important socialite contact, a woman named Petra who wore cashmere in July. Vespera had apologized for 3 full minutes, stuttering and dabbing and making it worse with every dab. Silas had watched from the doorway, laughing so hard his face went red. Under the table, her thumb had pressed the listening device into place with a click so small you'd need to be holding your breath in an empty room to hear it. The curtain incident 3 days later was a masterclass. Here she was straightening the heavy drapes in the drawing room, which required her to run her hands along the full length of the window frame, checking lock tension, measuring distance to the garden below, clocking the camera angle. She pulled the wrong cord. Both curtains came down. A rod the size of a javelin crashed to the marble floor with a sound that brought 3 guards running. Vespera stood in the mess with her hands over her mouth, glasses askew, looking like someone who had just accidentally started a small war. The guards sent her away and fixed it themselves. She left with exactly what she needed. Isadora had taken to announcing Vespera's failures at dinner. She broke the good decanter this morning. Laughter. She walked into the mirror in the East Hall. Twice. More laughter. Vespera sat at the far end of the table with her eyes on her plate and her ears on everything. She was cataloging voices, cataloging silences, the things people said and the things they didn't say, and the very specific tension that entered the room every time someone mentioned the north-facing gates. The north-facing gates. Three people had now changed the subject the moment that phrase came up. She filed it. But none of the masks and none of the planning had prepared her for Tuesday night. The storm. The sound of Isadora screaming. And what happened when Vespera walked into the nursery and forgot, just for a moment, who she was pretending to be. The storm hit the spire like it had a grudge against it. Rain against reinforced glass. Lightning throwing white light across the nursery in jagged bursts. The building groaned at a frequency that got into your chest and stayed. Isadora was screaming, not crying, screaming, the kind of sound that has no calculation in it, pure animal terror coming up from somewhere below language. Vespera was at the door in 3 seconds. She didn't call for the guards. She didn't reach for anyone. She just walked in, sat on the edge of the bed, and put her hand on Ilaro's back. Solid, still, unmoved by the storm. Thorne was sitting up in his bed across the room, watching. He always watched. Vespera reached for the book on the nightstand. The dragon story she'd been reading them at bedtime all week, and she made a decision. She didn't use the nanny voice. The nanny voice was soft and slightly breathy, calibrated to sound warm but limited, safe, non-threatening. What came out instead was different. Low, deep, resonant. The kind of voice that fills a room the way music fills a room. Not by being loud, but by occupying space completely. It was the voice she used when she needed people to stop. The voice that lived in the chest, not the throat. Isadora stopped screaming within 4 words. Not because the storm had stopped, because something in the room had changed. Something that the body recognizes before the brain does. Safety, it said. Real safety. The kind with teeth. The dragon lived at the top of the highest mountain, Vespera read, her voice steady as stone, while the lightning split the sky outside. Not because she was hiding, because from up high she could see everything coming. Isadora had tucked herself against Vespera's side, her breathing slowing. Nah, she didn't eat travelers, Vespera continued. She didn't breathe fire for show. She only had one purpose, one rule. She turned the page. The dragon doesn't eat the children, she read. The dragon eats the things that try to hurt the children. Silence. Then, Soren's voice from across the room. Quiet, precise. You're not a nanny. Vespera didn't look up from the book. What makes you say that? She asked, still in the deep voice. She hadn't reached for the nanny voice. She'd forgotten to. Soren was quiet for a moment. Nannies are scared of Aunt Isadora, he said. You're not scared of anything. Vespera turned another page. I'm whatever you need me to be, she said. Soren lay back down slowly, like someone who had asked a question and received an answer they were still deciding what to do with. When outside, the storm kept hitting the glass. Inside, Vespera sat with her back straight and her eyes on the door. The dragon at the mouth of the cave, watching, waiting, ready. It was a Tuesday afternoon, clear sky, the kind of bright that made the city look cleaner than it was. The twins were in the enclosed courtyard, the only outdoor space in the spire that Corvus permitted them to use. High walls, one gate, a security camera on each corner. From the outside, it looked safe. Vespera stood near the far wall, watching Isadora draw chalk animals on the stone tiles, and watching Soren read a book he pretended was a normal book, but was actually 2 reading levels above what most adults assumed he was capable of. She was also watching the city. This was a habit she couldn't turn off. She didn't observe her environment in wide sweeps the way most people do. She read it in layers. The middle layer right now. The neighboring tower blocks, the rooftops, the glass faces of the buildings that surrounded them. That's when she saw it. A glint. 3 miles out. The eastern tower. 42nd floor. Most eyes would have caught nothing. Most eyes don't know what they're looking for. Vespera's eyes had been trained over years to catch the one thing that doesn't belong in a skyline. The specific, brief, almost imperceptible shiver of a long-range lens catching the sun at the exact wrong angle. A sniper scope. Someone was watching the courtyard. She didn't react. Not a flinch. Not a tilt of the head. Nothing that could be picked up by the lens and interpreted as detection. She picked up one of Ilara's chalk sticks and crouched down on the tiles, pretending to help draw a lion. Her mind was already moving at a different speed. The angle of the glint, high, eastward. The trajectory to the twins' current position, clear. If the shooter wanted a clean shot, they had one right now. The fact that neither child had been shot meant the shooter wasn't ready. Observing, mapping, planning, the Volkov syndicate. She didn't alert Silas. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds and rejected it. If she told Silas, he would increase the security posture, double the guards, change the children's routine, which would signal to the sniper that they'd been spotted, which would accelerate their timeline. A plan in preparation was manageable. A plan activated under pressure was a different problem. No, she would handle this herself. She stood up, stretched her arms above her head in a lazy, yawning motion that looked like nothing, and moved the twins 4 feet to the left. Come help me find a better spot to draw, she told Ilara, dragging the chalk bucket with one foot and nudging Soren's knee with her own. The light's nicer here. She positioned them behind the sunshade she'd clumsily repositioned 3 days ago. At the time, Silas had complained about it blocking the camera angle. She'd apologized and left it exactly where it was, because it blocked more than the camera. From the 42nd floor, the lens found nothing but canvas. The game continued. 2 players. Only one knew they were playing. The gala was Isadora's idea of a performance. Crystal, candles, 60 guests arranged like decorations. A Corvus was somewhere downstairs in a closed room, closing a deal that would shift money across 4 countries in ways that no single government would ever be able to fully trace. Isadora moved through the party like a woman being applauded by an audience only she could hear. Vespera served, tray in hand, eyes down, the perfect picture of someone grateful just to be allowed in the room. But her mind was elsewhere. She'd clocked the first irregularity at 8:47 p.m. A cleaning crew, side gate, 6 of them in gray uniforms with the correct logo on the breast pocket and the wrong shoes on their feet. Professional cleaners wore slip-resistant soles. Rubber. Practical. These 6 wore flat-soled boots with reinforced toe caps. Tactical footwear. She swept the room without moving her eyes, a skill that took years to acquire. The guests, the guards, the positions, the distance from the children's floor to the nearest exit. Silas at the far wall, glass of water in hand, already bored. The 6 men moved with a rhythm, even spacing, practiced. They weren't cleaning crew. They were a unit, liquidators, and they weren't heading for Corvus. They were heading upstairs, toward the children. Vespera needed 5 seconds. She chose the nearest object, the bottle of Romanée-Conti, 1945. She knew what it was worth. She'd read the household inventory. She stumbled. The sound was extraordinary. Not the smash. The bottle didn't smash, it poured. A torrent of deep arterial red across the white silk rug and upward across Isadora's chest like an accusation. The room went rigid. Isadora's face went through shock, disbelief, chlorine fury in the space of 3 seconds. You stuttering, pathetic creature, Isadora breathed, and then the slap. The sound echoed off the marble. Vespera's glasses spun across the floor. The room watched. Nobody moved. Nobody ever moves when someone powerful hits someone powerless. They freeze and they watch, and they are relieved, somewhere small and shameful, that it isn't them. Isadora pulled her arm back for the second strike, and the second strike never came. Vespera's hand moved once. Her fingers closed around Isadora's wrist, not hard enough to break it, hard enough to stop the universe. The trembling Nanny was gone. In her place stood something else entirely. A woman with eyes like deep, cold water, looking directly into Isadora's face for the first time. The wine, Vespera said, her voice dropping to a frequency that traveled through the floor, is replaceable. She turned her head slightly, toward the door. The children are not. She released Isadora's wrist. They are coming through the north gate. The north door didn't open. It detonated. A single-shaped charge Small, precise, the kind used by people who've done this before, blew the hinges and sent the door flat across the marble in one rigid slab. Before the echo died, 4 men were through the gap. Tactical gear, suppressed submachine guns, visors down, moving in a clean diamond formation with the kind of spacing that only happens when a unit has rehearsed an approach so many times it's become involuntary. They weren't scanning for threats. They were scanning for children. Isadora dropped to the floor and crawled behind the sofa. The 60 guests became 60 different versions of panic, crouching, screaming, running in directions that made no geometric sense. Silas's voice came through the security comms, barking orders that arrived 3 seconds too late for everything he was trying to prevent. Vespera was already moving. She didn't run toward the exit. She ran toward the serving table. The heavy silver tray, 40 centimeters across, solid, 1.5 kilograms of metal, came up in her left hand before the first shooter had finished sweeping the room. The first burst of suppressed fire hit the tray. Ping, ping, ping. 3 rounds. She felt each one like a punch through the metal and absorbed the impact by letting her arm rotate back with it instead of fighting the force. Basic physics she'd been taught. Don't resist momentum. Redirect it. She was already moving toward the shooter. The room was screaming and spinning and full of wrong sounds. Vespera moved through it like it wasn't there. She drove the edge of the tray into the first man's throat. Not the face, the throat, where you take someone's ability to command their own breathing, and used his buckling body as the shield she needed to close the distance on the second shooter. He raised his weapon. She was already inside his arm. 2 strikes, elbow to the jaw, palm to the ear. He dropped. Across the room in the corner near the fireplace, Soren and Ilara stood pressed against the wall. They had been brought down by the maid for a brief appearance at the start of the evening. A mistake. Vespera had known it was a mistake and hadn't been in a position to stop it. They were watching her now, not screaming, watching. Soren's face said, "I knew it." Ilara's face said, "Dragon." Vespera ripped a flashbang from the first man's vest. She kicked it hard and flat across the marble into the hallway, turning her back and dropping her chin into her chest in the same motion. Boom. Then she moved. "Children, with me, now." And this time she didn't stutter at all. The kitchen was not a coincidence. Vespera had chosen it on day 2. While fumbling with the pantry shelves, she'd quietly rearranged the room's geography. Heavy island counter in the center, cover and barrier. 1 entry point she couldn't block, 1 she could. The knife rack positioned where her right hand would naturally fall. The cast iron skillet, heaviest in the set, hung lowest and closest to the door. She hadn't known when. She'd known it would come. She came through the kitchen door with both children pressed behind her, 1 hand on each of their shoulders, moving them in a low crouch the way a person moves through a room where the ceiling is on fire. "Stay behind the island," she said. "Do not look at the floor. Do not stand up. Don't move until I tell you." Soren nodded once. He understood instructions the way soldiers did. Clean receipt, no questions. Ilara pressed herself against the cabinet and held her bare against her chest with both hands. Vespera turned to face the door. The first mercenary came through fast and low, which meant he was trained, which meant she adjusted. He had a blade, not a gun. They'd switched to quiet weapons, which meant they were close to their objective and didn't want the noise, which meant they knew exactly where the children were. "They have internal information," Vespera noted. "Someone told them the layout." She filed it. No time now. She caught his blade on the skillet. The clang was massive in the small kitchen. He was stronger than her. Most people were. She didn't try to match his strength. She redirected his weight forward, let his momentum carry him past her hip, and buried the ceramic chef's knife into his femoral artery on the way down. Fast, clinical, final. "Don't look," she said to the children without turning around. The second mercenary was smarter. He stopped in the doorway instead of committing. They looked at each other for 1 full second. She was standing in an apron, holding a skillet and a knife. Glasses gone, hair half down. He made the mistake of taking a half second to process how absurd she looked. She closed the distance in that half second. It was enough. 2 down. The building was still screaming above her. She could hear Silas's team on the upper floor. Chaotic, overwhelmed, already compromised by the efficiency of the unit that had come through the north gate. The Volkovs had planned this well, but they planned for the security team, Vespera thought. They didn't plan for me. She wiped the blade on the apron. She repositioned in front of the island. She waited. She heard him before she saw him. The footsteps were wrong. Not the urgent, pounding gait of guards responding to a breach. Not the careful, precise steps of a threat approaching. Something in between. Controlled urgency. Someone who needed to appear panicked, but whose body had too much training to fully commit to the performance. Vespera registered it in the 2 seconds before the kitchen door opened. She adjusted her grip on the knife. Corvus Thorne came through the door with his weapon drawn. He took in the room in one sweep. The 2 mercenaries on the floor, Vespera standing in front of the island, the twins crouched behind it. His face did something complicated. Vespera. He breathed her name like relief, like a man who had sprinted across a burning building and arrived just in time. You saved them. He started walking toward his children. Vespera didn't lower her knife. Stop! He stopped, looked at her. And something shifted behind his eyes. Very fast, very controlled. A recalibration. What are you doing? They're my children. I need to. I said stop, Corvus. She hadn't planned this moment. It had come to her 90 seconds ago, while she was still in the main hall. The men who'd come through the north gate, she'd been building a file on the Volkov syndicate for 3 days. Their operational signatures, their equipment preferences, their comms protocols. She knew what Volkov gear looked like. These men's radios weren't Volkov. The frequency they used, a narrow-band encrypted channel she'd caught a fragment of through her own sensor equipment, was domestic, federal, government issue. And the attack formation they'd used, the diamond entry, the immediate segregation of threats, or the non-lethal approach to the civilians, wasn't a syndicate hit. It was an extraction. They're not Volkov, Vespera said. Her voice was very quiet now, the kind of quiet that fills a room completely. They're federal agents. Corvus said nothing. In the corner, Soren had gone completely still. Even at 6 years old, he understood that the conversation had shifted into territory that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with his world. They weren't here to kill the children, Vespera said. They were here to take them. She looked at Corvus. Away from you. The word landed like a stone in a still pool. She watched the ripple move across his face, watched him decide what to do with it. You've been very good at this, Corvus said. His voice was different now. The warmth was gone. What was left was the machinery underneath. He raised his gun. The gun didn't scare her. What scared her was how long it had taken her to see it. She was the best Tier 0 operative the syndicate had ever built. She had walked into fortresses and come out the other side. She had identified threats through walls and across 3 miles of city skyline. And she had missed this one, because she'd been looking at the wrong person. You're a rogue sleeper agent, she said. Not a question. She was speaking it out loud to finish the process of believing it. 12 years inside the syndicate, building a cover so deep that even the syndicate thought you were who you said you were, but you were always working for something else. And something that needed your children's biological material for a program that requires a very specific genetic profile. Corvus lowered his chin slightly. Not a denial. The Volkov threat was real, she said, but it was also useful. It gave you a reason to bring someone like me inside, someone who would neutralize the federal threat before you had to do it yourself and risk exposure. She looked at him. You used me to attack federal agents. I used you, Corvus said, to protect my investment. In the corner behind the island, Alara made a small sound, the kind of sound a child makes when they hear a word used for them that they don't understand, but the tone of it tells them everything. Investment. Vespera felt something happen in her chest. She had felt it once before, years ago, out in a basement room under a city that didn't exist, when she had understood for the first time that the organization that had built her had never once considered what she wanted. She recognized the feeling now. Rage, the clean kind, the useful kind. You gave their DNA to the syndicate, Vesper said, for the bioweapon program. Your own children. They are my blood, Corvus said. My legacy doesn't end with sentiment. It ends with power, and power requires sacrifice. They are 6 years old. They are resources. He said it the way someone states a weather forecast. Factual, untroubled. Something settled in Vespera, a decision landing cleanly. She moved before he finished squeezing the trigger. She wasn't faster than a bullet. Nobody was. But she was faster than the decision to fire one. She closed the distance before the decision became a reflex, inside his arm before the arm could fully extend. The gun went sideways. The shot hit the ceiling. From behind the island, Soren's voice came clearly through the noise. "Run," he told his sister. For the first time in his life, he was giving the order. The building was dying. Corvus had triggered the self-destruct sequence from a panel behind the kitchen ventilation unit. She'd heard the code entered, 4 digits, the beep of confirmation, and now the spire was wailing from its own bones. Emergency lights strobing red down every corridor. The voice of the building's automated system repeating a single instruction: evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. The federal agents were pulling out. And their objective, extracting the children, had collapsed when the children vanished into the kitchen and the kitchen became a crime scene. They were withdrawing with their wounded, buying distance from a building scheduled to come down, which meant there was no cavalry coming, which meant this ended at the top. Vesper had the children on the staircase with Isadora, who had, in a moment of crisis, made the unexpected decision to grab both twins by the hand and run, which was either survival instinct or the first genuinely useful thing she'd done in the 3 weeks Vesper had known her. She didn't question it. "Get them to the helipad," she told Isidora. "Don't stop. Don't wait for me. The pilot's name is Rue, and he owes Corvus a debt he'd rather not have called in. Tell him the debt is cleared. One, he'll fly." Isidora stared at her. For one moment, the architecture of her face changed. The cruelty was gone. Underneath it was something ordinary and frightened and almost human. "I knew," Isidora said, "about what he was doing. I didn't know about the children. I swear to you, I didn't." "Move," Vesper said. Isidora moved. Corvus reached her on the 14th floor. He was bleeding from his left hand. She'd taken 2 fingers in the kitchen, and he'd used the distraction of his own pain to reset and pursue. That told her something important. He'd been trained to fight through injury without slowing. That meant this would not be quick. The 14th floor was the security nerve center. Banks of monitors, most now strobing or dark. Server racks lining the walls. The room smelled of recycled air and burning wiring. Red emergency light making everything look like the inside of something that was already ending. They faced each other. "You could have just done the job," Corvus said. He sounded genuinely aggrieved. "You were perfect for it." "I was," Vespera said. "That's why you're not getting away." He came at her. He was good. She'd known he would be. The no-wrinkles suit hadn't been ego. It had been the discipline of a man who'd kept his body as sharp as his mind. He had reach on her. Weight. A nastiness that didn't hesitate. He split her lip in the 3rd exchange. She tasted blood. She smiled. "I know," she said. "It's concerning, isn't it?" She drove her elbow into his ribs. He gasped. She hit him again. The roof door hit the night air like a held breath, finally breaking. Rain. Horizontal. Vicious. The kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as attack. The rotor wash from the helicopter at the far end of the helipad added its own violence. Wind and noise and jet fuel and ozone. A storm inside the storm. Through the cockpit glass, she could see Isadora strapping Soren in with one hand and Alara with the other. Rue had the engine running. 40 seconds to liftoff. Vespera stepped onto the helipad. Corvus was right behind her. He was still moving. That was the problem with this kind of man. You couldn't argue him to a stop. You couldn't reason him down. He had made a decision about the world, about what other people were worth and what they existed to provide him. And that decision had calcified over years into something that wasn't ideology anymore. It was just structure. It was just how he understood reality. You couldn't change that. You could only end it. They moved in the rain, and the rotor wash, and the red light bleeding from the open roof door behind them. He was slower now. The hand, the ribs. He was managing pain the way trained people manage it. Boxing it, working around it. But it was accumulating. His footwork was compensating. His left side was opening. She let him think he was pushing her back. She let him think the wet surface was an equalizer, and the wind was in his favor, and the gap in her guard on the right was real. 3 steps. 2. 1. When she felt his weight commit, she dropped. Her right leg swept low, hooked behind his ankle, and she drove upward from the crouch with every pound of force she could pull from the ground through her legs, through her shoulder, into his center mass. It was not elegant. It didn't need to be. Corvus Thorne went over the railing. He didn't scream. People with that much control never scream. He was recalculating right up until the fog swallowed him, still trying to find an angle. There was no angle. The Obsidian Spire rose from the city's highest point. The fog was thick tonight. The city swallowed him without a sound. Vespera stood at the railing. The rain hit her face. She breathed. Behind her, the helicopter lifted. She watched it go without moving. Just for a moment. It's just long enough to confirm they were clear. And through the rain-blurred glass, she could see Alara's face, pressed against the window, looking down. Alara raised her hand. Vespera raised hers. Then she turned and walked back toward the roof door. She had 3 minutes before the building came down. She used all 3. The federal agents found the children on a rooftop 3 blocks south, inside a helicopter being tended by a white-knuckled pilot named Rue, who kept repeating the phrase, "Debt is cleared," to anyone who came near him. The twins were unharmed. Soren had a cut on his palm from the kitchen floor, a piece of something she hadn't managed to clear in time. He hadn't mentioned it. He'd pressed his sleeve against it and said nothing, and she would think about that for a long time afterward. Alara was asleep, somehow, against Isadora's shoulder, the one-eared bear tucked under her arm. Isidora was awake, rigid, eyes forward. The expression of someone who was doing a long and private accounting of every decision they had ever made. Nobody spoke. The Obsidian Spire came down at 11:22 p.m. Not explosively, a controlled structural collapse, the kind that costs a great deal of money to engineer precisely, which meant Corvus had planned for this possibility, had planned to erase everything if everything fell apart. It fell in on itself the way things do when the center goes. The city watched. Someone filmed it. By morning, it was everywhere. The federal team lead was a woman named Agent Vasquez. She had the flat, economical manner of someone who had spent years in rooms where the wrong word in the wrong moment cost lives. She interviewed Isadora for 2 hours. She reviewed the helicopter's black box data. She filed reports that Vespera would never read. She also walked a perimeter of the landing zone for 40 minutes after the children were taken to safety, looking for the nanny. In the nursery wreckage, or what the collapse had left of the east wing before it fell, a forensics officer found a pair of glasses. Thick frames, the kind that screamed, "I am nobody." One lens cracked. The forensics officer photographed them and bagged them and wrote in his report, "Personal effects, unidentified female, likely civilian staff." Agent Vasquez picked up the bag and looked at the glasses for a long time. Then she put them back down. "She was never here," Vasquez said. To no one in particular. It wasn't a question. Soren, sitting wrapped in a foil emergency blanket in the back of a government vehicle, had been asked 3 times by 3 different agents. "Can you describe the nanny?" He looked out the window each time. Then he said, "She was clumsy. She dropped things a lot. She stuttered." A pause. "I don't think she was a very good nanny." The agents wrote it down. Alara, from the seat beside him, said nothing. She just held the bear tighter. The city was still lit up over the collapse when Vespera walked out of it. Different hair, natural gait, back to its real shape. Weight forward, arms controlled. The walk of a woman who had decided where she was going and had already calculated how long it would take. She had changed in a parking structure 3 blocks east. New clothes from a bag she'd staged there on day 4 of the mission. The disguise was gone. The mousy brown in a bin. The clumsy flat shoes in another. She walked like herself for the first time in 3 weeks. It felt like a door opening. Her phone buzzed at 11:58 p.m. She looked at the screen. The syndicate. 1 line. No pleasantries. Contract breached. Termination order. Active. She stood on the wet pavement for a moment, reading it once. She thought about the 12 years she'd given to an organization that thought of human beings the way Corvus Thorne had thought of his own children. As assets, as instruments, as entries in a ledger that only ever asked one question. What is this worth to us? She thought about a 6-year-old boy who hadn't screamed once in a burning building. She thought about a girl with a one-eared bear who had pressed her hand against the glass of a lifting helicopter. She deleted the message. She kept walking. The city was still happening around her. Sirens, distant, moving in the direction of what used to be the spire. Lights in apartment windows. Someone's music leaking from a car stopped at a red light. The ordinary machinery of a city that hadn't noticed that something had just shifted in it. She had no safe house. She had no handler. She had no contract and no cover and no organization at her back. She had 3 false identities, $11,000 in 3 currencies, distributed between 2 shoes and a jacket lining, and a set of skills that took a decade and a half to build and would take considerably longer to fully unpack. And she had a reason. I remember for the first time in a career built entirely on other people's reasons, she had her own. She stopped at the corner where the city opened up and the horizon showed itself for the first time in 3 weeks. Sunrise, still 40 minutes out, but the sky was already making its promises. That thin blue line above the dark that says, something is coming. Something is different. She looked at it. Her phone buzzed again. Different number this time. She didn't recognize it. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Silence on the line for 3 seconds. Then, Soren's voice, small, careful, choosing his words the way he chose everything, with the quiet deliberateness of a child who had learned that careless words had real costs. We're okay, he said. Vespera closed her eyes. I know, she said. Another silence. Will we see you again? She opened her eyes. The sky was doing what it promised. You won't see me, she said, but I'll be there. She hung up. She looked at the horizon for one more moment, at the blue line that was becoming gold, at the city waking up below it, at all the space between where she was and where she was going. Then she smiled. Let them come.